This is 33 Tech with the rocket launcher in Ultrakill. Before we start the video is divided into 4 segments: the base rocket launcher, the Freezeframe, the SRS cannon, and the Firestarter. Anyways, let's get into it, starting with the base rocket launcher. When sliding, then jumping and firing a rocket at the ground at the same time, the player will gain both a lot of horizontal and vertical mobility. This doesn't take up any stamina, which makes it more efficient than dash jumping, which takes up 2 stamina. When whiplashing a rocket to yourself, you can cause a red explosion around yourself that deals 7 damage to nearby enemies. This deals 35 damage to the player, but if you dash 2 times before the rocket whiplashes back to you, then the rocket will still cause a red explosion, but the player will take 0 damage. This can also be used for ultra boosts in the air for mobility, but you take 35 damage each time, so I wouldn't recommend it. If an enemy has magnets attached to them from either the attractor nailgun or saw blade launcher, any rockets fired from the player or an enemy will home in on the enemy with a magnet inside of them. When whiplashing a rocket into a Maurice, the rocket will actually explode on contact with the Maurice. Normally, explosives like cores in rockets repel off Maurices, and it seems useless to whiplash a rocket into a Maurice because they are explosion resistant. But it can insta-kill a Maurice if they are firing their orb barrage attack, because the explosion will repel the hell orbs back into the Maurice. The rocket launcher causes red explosions that deal 7 damage on airborne targets. Light enemies that are whiplashed are also considered airborne, so if you whiplash a light enemy and then fire a rocket at that enemy, you can easily cause a red explosion. While you're in the air, you can fire a rocket below you and then whiplash the rocket to start rocket riding. I know that not many people use this way to rocket ride, but it takes no stamina and it's usually more consistent than other ways of rocket riding. While you are rocket riding, you can use the jackhammer to fire the rocket into an enemy, as it becomes a hit scan explosion attack that deals 7 damage. On any difficulty below brutal, the rocket launcher can actually insta-kill a mind flayer if timed correctly. Firing a rocket at the mind flayer right when they spawn their homing orbs attack will insta-kill the mind flayer. The timing of this is really strict, but when you pull it off, it's very satisfying. When shooting a rocket in the direction of a Maurice laser, a sentry laser, or the Gutterman shots, the rocket will explode into a mini nuke, which will explode any enemies nearby. It's not extremely useful, since a core will do a bigger explosion instead, but it's still pretty cool when you kill enemies with it. Now we're getting into tech with the Freezeframe rocket launcher. Before a room spawns enemies, you can set up rockets by freezing them until they become supercharged, and then when the enemies spawn, you can unfreeze the rockets to deal a crap ton of damage, or to insta-kill the enemies right when they spawn. When attaching magnets to an enemy, you can freeze rockets until they are supercharged and then unfreeze them. The supercharged rockets will home in on the enemy to deal a crap ton of damage to tankier enemies like mind flayers, insurrectionists, virtues, and more. To rocket ride with the Freezeframe, aim slightly down, dash, and while you're dashing, fire a rocket, then freeze the rocket, and immediately unfreeze it to start rocket riding. This is the fastest way to rocket ride and how I usually do it. When freezing a rocket in the air, you can fire a hit scan core at the rocket with the core eject jackhammer to cause a mini nuke explosion. If you do it the other way around though, which is freezing a rocket in the air and then hitting the rocket into a core with the jackhammer, the explosion will be an actual nuke, the same nuke caused by the core eject and the malicious rail cannon. Since the Freezeframe can freeze rockets, you can also freeze the rockets shot from gutter tanks. Not only that, but if you attach a magnet to the gutter tank, stand on the rocket shot by the gutter tank for a second, and then unfreeze the Freezeframe, the rocket will be sent back to the gutter tank, insta-killing it. Frozen rockets can be used as conductibles with the nailgun, ferryman lightning, and the electric rail cannon to deal extra damage and range with conductivity. While rocket riding and positioning the rocket slightly above yourself, You can use the jackhammer to fire both a rocket and a core at the same time to fire 2 hit scan explosions that deal 7 damage each, which overall deals 14 explosive damage. Since the rocket turns into a hit scan shot when it is hit by the jackhammer, you can hit a rocket into a coin to have the hit scan explosion target the nearest enemy. This one isn't really practical, but when freezing in the air and then spamming frozen rockets around yourself, you can use the jackhammer to fire all frozen rockets at once to deal an insane amount of damage. Credits to Everstorm for discovering this. Now we're getting into tech with the SRS cannon, or the shitty rock shooting cannon. In close range, you can fire the cannonball at an enemy and then parry it back into the enemy to deal a quick 12 damage, which is strong enough to insta-kill virtues and sentries. The cannonball can be used to stun insurrectionists temporarily. The cannonball will stun the insurrectionist for even longer if the insurrectionist is hit by the cannonball mid-air. You can fire at the cannonball with a hit scan shot for the cannonball to explode and deal damage to enemies nearby. You can parry the cannonball as soon as it is fired to cause the cannonball to be sent flying instantly. It can also pierce multiple light enemies when parried. If you're at mid-range from an enemy, you can fire the cannonball at an enemy, whiplash the cannonball back towards yourself, and then parry the cannonball back at the enemy. When rail coining with the electric rail cannon, you can add a cannonball in between the coins to deal extra damage. This one definitely isn't practical, but this one is called dribbling. Dribbling is where you stack multiple cannonballs with the whiplash, which means you can hit an enemy with multiple cannonballs at once. But it takes a while for the SRS cooldown to finish, so it's not practical. Credits to Finray for discovering this. Now we're getting into tech with the Firestarter. When holding fire and alt fire immediately after switching to the Firestarter, you can fire rockets and oil at the same time. You can light the ground on fire and the enemy on fire at the same time to deal extra fire damage to an enemy. This is especially useful for enemies like the Hideous Mass, as they cannot move away from the fire. When covering a Maurice in oil, they will be able to take explosion damage, which means you can also insta-kill the Maurice if you fire a rocket at the Maurice while the Maurice is firing their orb barrage attack, so you can insta-kill them. In brutal difficulty, gutter tanks will slip on oil if they miss their punch, allowing you to parry them. When sliding on oil, your move speed will be slightly increased and it will feel like skating on ice. If there is oil underwater, the oil will explode and deal explosion damage if a rocket explodes on it. This is situational, but when it does work, it does an insane amount of damage. And that's all the tech I know with the rocket launcher. I hope you learned some tech from this video that you might start using. Also, if you enjoyed, consider subscribing. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subs and it would help out a lot. But until then, I'll see ya.